The Learning Systems Institute presents the FSU Distinguished Scholar Video Series in Instructional Systems. This series is dedicated to Dr. Robert M. Gagne, Professor Emeritus, the Florida State University.
Hello, I'm Bob Morgan, Director Emeritus of the Learning Systems Institute, which is the organization which has sponsored the production and development of the series of tapes, of which you now have one. This group of 56 tapes was developed in order to capture some of the history and to look at some of the future of instructional development in this country. I hope you enjoy these tapes and find them useful.
This program is the second in a series of 2 tapes discussing writing books and articles and research. This topic is discussed by these leading instructional systems faculty: Dr. Robert Branson, Dr. Walter Dick, Dr. Marcy Driscoll, Dr. Don Ely, Dr. Roger Kaufman, Dr. John Keller, Dr. Robert Morgan, Dr. Robert Reeser, Dr. Jim Russell, Dr. Walt Wager.
Contrary to what some of my colleagues would tell you, I've not had a bad experience with the publishers that we worked with. As I indicated, we started out with Wiley Publishers, and then they sold out their educational line to Macmillan. We worked with Macmillan for a number of years very successfully, and now we're with Merrill Prentice Hall. I think we probably have the strongest support team that we've ever had with the 6th edition of the Heineck book and the 2nd edition of the Newby book. So I wish I could give you some magic formula and such, but do pick your publisher carefully. Talk to authors who are currently working with that publisher. We didn't do that because Heineck already had a contract with Wiley, but if I were going to do that today, I would say talk with other authors who work with that publisher, get to know your editor and such, and then certainly it has to be a collaborative relationship. You know, they can't expect you to do everything, and you can't expect them to do everything. And I'm sure if I were giving you advice from the publisher's point of view, try to stay on schedule, because that is the biggest problem they have working with faculty. Is many faculty kind of work at their own pace. They're used to that academic freedom, and so I think Heineck and Melinda would tell you that I've been the one to crack the whip on that team, and now with Sharon on board, she's more of a whip cracker too, I guess. But we make every effort to stay on schedule.
Articles are very different from books. And research articles, I think, are different from conceptual articles. Conceptual articles really are like the one I did for Journal of Instructional Development. They start with ideas, things that I'm thinking about that might concern my teaching, or ideas that I've been working with, and I haven't seen in the literature any place any understanding or any other writing that captures just what I'm thinking. And so they're the hardest to write. I think conceptual articles are extremely difficult to write because you not only have to synthesize stuff you've read, you know, what's already out there, but in essence you're taking then your interpretation and your extension of those ideas into something that's new, and then trying to express what this new thing is and why you think it's important and where it should go in the field. And so my tendency with those is to start in a very brainstorming sort of way. To say, all right, what are all the things that I'm thinking about that are going to go into this paper, and get them all down, and then begin to organize, think about my angle, in the sense that you can't just be, well, here's this idea and this idea and this idea. You have to connect them all together, and you have to say, well, how do they connect, and where's it going? What's your angle? What's the impact you expect it to have? A research article is much more prescribed in its format and in its content, in that if you've done some kind of a study, you have to justify why did you do it? What led you to it in the first place? And how does it connect to previous literature? That's your introduction. Then what did you do? That's your method. And then what were the results and what do they mean, which are your results in discussion. And those are very prescribed for me. I always write the method first because it's the easiest. And then you can say, yeah, I made some progress today. I've written the methodology, okay? Because it is. It's much easier to write that than the rest of it. Then I have to write the introduction because I have to get a sense of what are the objectives of the study, the goals of the study, before I can possibly write the pieces that connect back to it, okay? And so that's a very prescribed, for me, very prescribed order. Now books, I never intended to write books, okay? Really, I didn't. Gagné asked me to co-author the second edition of The Essentials of Learning for Instruction, which is a little book. And at the time I was using it in one of my classes for undergraduates, and so I said, well, sure. And I had some ideas because Gagné, although he taught a course for pre-service teachers, never really worked with that population a great deal, whereas that had always been an interest of mine in how you help teachers become better teachers or how you help them become good teachers. And so I had ideas of how to make the book more attractive or relevant to pre-service teachers. And so when we talked about what we would do, he liked that idea, and so we basically agreed that I would write, there are 8 chapters, I would write 4, he would write 4. In terms of the first draft, we would comment on each other's work, and then I would add to all of the chapters activities, exercises, things that would help pre-service teachers really get into this material and understand it and do something with it. And one of the things that I can still just remember being amazed at, because I had a great deal of admiration for Gagné's writing, it's very elegant, was that I thought, well, gee, who am I to be making comments on his writing? You know, I'm a master. But he never questioned it. If I suggested a change, or as far as he was concerned, he assumed I knew as much as he did, and he treated me as an equal, except he wrote a lot more quickly than I did. And so that was a lot of fun, but that was still his book, okay?
Dan and I were talking yesterday, and he said something I hadn't even really thought about. Oftentimes it's related to my family or my kids. So for example, early on when my kids were real young, they were watching Sesame Street. And I started thinking, well, this is a great show. How can we get the kids to learn more from Sesame Street? So I developed a line of research where we looked at adults questioning kids about what they were viewing on the program. Got some graduate students involved in that research effort, wrote several articles and got them published in that area. Later on, as my kids got involved in computers, I started looking at the quality of computer software and bemoaned the lack of good quality software, and worked with Walt Dick to develop a software evaluation model where we could better judge the quality of instructional software. And again, getting interested in the topic, I teamed up with somebody, in this case a faculty member, but also got a couple of students involved, did a few research studies. As soon as we did those studies, we worked at writing them up, sent them in for publication, and they got published. And I think we had made a contribution in that area, too. So it's typically, I find an area that's of interest to me, start thinking about what would be good questions to ask, research questions to ask related to that area. Usually team up with somebody, because I find that I can stay more on task if I get another faculty member or a graduate student working with me. I'm more likely to keep deadlines than if I'm the only one monitoring my progress. And as a result of that, I think I've been pretty productive over the years in terms of getting articles and books out.
Well, I guess it starts with an opinion or an idea of how to do something, in my case, and then just getting it down on paper and trying to explicate it and make it as clear as I possibly can for other readers. It's a painful process. It's hard. It's something that once you get into, it's not that bad, but you have to keep at it, and there's so many other competing things for your time. It's a very time-consuming process for me. Writing is. I like to solve things at high level, I don't like detail particularly. I like the high-level design and leave the detail to somebody else. But writing is a lot of detail, and so that was what makes it hard for me. But I don't know that I have a particular process. I just have to force myself to sit down and do it.
Asking about stories here, if I were characterizing the Heineck, Melinda, Russell team, this is before Sharon came on board, if I could characterize this, and that's always dangerous, of course, I'm one that wants to get the job done. You know, make a commitment, get it done. You may sacrifice a little bit on quality, but get it done on time. Mike Melinda, on the other hand, is a perfectionist. I mean, he wants it done right and will work over it, rework it, and things to make it the best possible. And of course, as you can see right away, this causes conflict. Here's Russell out wanting to get it done on time and certainly with reasonable quality, but I may sacrifice a little quality. And here's Mike wanting to make sure it's perfect before anybody sees it. And Heineck's caught in the middle, and I once jokingly made the statement that I thought that Mike would put polish on a stagecoach to make it go faster, you know. So he just wanted to do it perfect. But I think it was this team, this blend, that I could not have done this myself. And I'll make assumptions here. I don't think Heineck could have done it himself. I jokingly say he had several years and didn't do anything on the book. And I think it's something that Mike could not have done by himself, but it's the idea that two or more heads are better than one, and working collaboratively and giving feedback to each other, and particularly if all the authors, as we were, are able to take that feedback in a constructive manner for the betterment of the project rather than worrying about individual egos and this kind of thing, and having a supportive staff there at the publisher to help you bring this off.
If you're writing a proposal, let's say, writing a proposal is covered under the rubric of marketing. And writing a proposal is a great deal of preliminary work in trying to figure out what it is that someone might be willing to fund, what kind of problem they have that you might be able to solve. I'm talking now about regular proposals to agencies, not grant proposals to foundations. That's a different kind of cat. But it's predominantly oriented toward trying to figure out what you can do or what you can bring to the table that would be useful to the organization. At the same time, if you're in a university, you need to be thinking about how this is going to contribute to the state of the art. How is this thing going to advance knowledge? And so that's what I meant earlier by saying you have to embed your knowledge advancement into proposals that are going to solve problems for people who have funds to get their problems solved. So you have to serve the client and at the same time serve the field. And if you can't do that, you have no business writing a proposal from a university. Now, if you're in private business, of course, and you offer that service, that doesn't apply. But in a university, you have no business writing proposals that do not allow you to do such things as support graduate students, advance the state of the art, and solve problems for the people with whom you're working. Going down to state agencies or other agencies and let somebody else define the problem and then tell you what to do is not a very good way to spend your time. So for proposal writing, then, it's all front end. And I think the most critical thing in writing a proposal is to write what it is that you think you want to do, and then have that proposal reviewed by what people call red teams. People who don't know anything about the proposal and who don't know anything about it, they're going to read it cold and give you honest feedback. about what it says and what it doesn't say and how good it is and how good it isn't and that sort of thing. Now, getting colleagues to give you honest feedback is like learning to like distasteful vegetables. I mean, most people don't really like crucifers, but they eat them anyway. It's good for them. Red team review is good for you. It's not fun, but it's good for you. Writing articles and the like is a slightly different process, because there you have to plan what it is you want to say. And that's your problem, not anybody else's. So you have to organize your thoughts in terms of what it is that you think you want to say. And you have to gather your resources, find out who said something about this in the past, see what empirical evidence there is, and all of that. Planning occupies a good bit of time, planning and thinking. I like a rule of thumb that says you ought to spend about a third of your time in planning, a third of your time in writing, and a third of your time in editing and rewriting. In training people to do that, you don't have a lot of difficulty ordinarily to get them to do a little bit of planning. Most people fail in the act of planning. They do not spend enough time planning and thinking about it. And then when they write, the writing becomes less organized than it really needs to be. But what you can't do without a whip, really, is to make people edit and rewrite. Because they think of so often writing as an assignment from a professor that they have to do. It isn't something they want to do. And if you can't learn to edit and rewrite, forget it. Most of the journal articles that I review as a consulting editor are rejected for two reasons. They are written so badly that they can't be fixed. Or two, they are making absolutely no new contribution to the field. So a little bit of planning will help you to avoid not making a contribution. And a lot of editing will vastly improve your chances of getting something by the editor that isn't written so badly that the editor can't understand what you're trying to say. And there's no substitute. You can't avoid that. Find and cultivate colleagues who will read your papers and who care enough about you to tell you the truth. You know, I have friends to whom I can send a paper, and then I just dread getting it back, because it will come back with red marks on every page, sometimes every line. And you have to fix them.
Another research and publishing area is in trends in the field of educational technology. In my capacity as director of the ERIC Clearinghouse on Information Resources, we were required in the 1980s to submit to Washington every year a list of the trends in the field. Well, how does one determine what trends are in the field? You know, you can put your finger to the wind. You can ask a lot of people who should be knowledgeable. You may call a conference and people talk for several days and come up with a list of trends. But I chose to do a content analysis based on the work of John Nesbitt and his megatrends, and his work I found was based on other work of a sociologist. And I used some of those same content analysis techniques, and over 5 different publications on trends in educational technology, starting with 1988, and the last one was 1995. In looking at over 2,000 items, from dissertations at the most productive institutions, ERIC input, articles appearing in 5 most frequently used professional journals, and conference programs, I was able to get items that were then content analyzed and put together to form
the trends in the field. So that grew out of an obligation, a contractual obligation with the U.S. government.
First of all, make sure that your article is clearly written, and that you've avoided all typos, formatting errors, and so on. Nothing irks me more than to get a manuscript that obviously hasn't been carefully proofread, submitted for publication in a journal. Because as a reviewer for articles, I need to do detailed evaluation of what the person has written. And I don't mind spending the time doing that and writing a 1.5 or 2-page critique, as a lot of my colleagues do, if the person has, carefully written in their manuscript. But if I see a lot of typographical errors and obviously or grammatical mistakes, and it's obvious this person hasn't put much work into his or her efforts, then I come at it with a negative attitude to begin with, and it's going to work to the disservice of the person who's written the article. So be careful about avoiding those types of mistakes. Get somebody to react to your article early on. So have another student, or better yet, a professor, review the article. And your professors are going to be willing to do that. Get them to react, tell you what's good about the article, what needs to be improved. Use their feedback to improve it. I still use that technique constantly with the articles I submit. I remember several occasions where I had Walt Dick or Marcy Driscoll take a look at the articles I've written, and I've gotten some really excellent feedback that's gotten me to look at an issue in a different way, revise the article based upon that feedback, and then submitted it, and it was a much stronger article than the one I had written originally. So get others to react to what you've written. Make good use of spell checkers, grammar checkers. They're not the be-all and end-all, but they're going to certainly help, so make use of those tools. If there's a course on writing, improving your writing skills at the university you're at, take the course. That's going to help improve your writing. It's real frustrating for me to see studies that have been pretty well done in terms of conducting the study written up in a very poor and disorganized fashion, with just a little bit of reading or studying how to write an article clearly. I think these people could have had a much better chance of getting their research, which wasn't bad research, published. I think oftentimes it's the way we write it up that's more important, unfortunately, than the quality of the research itself. So really work at doing a good job of writing it up. That's going to go a long way towards your getting published. Well, I do a lot of checking and rechecking the work I do. There's all different ways you can go about writing. Some people, quickly put out a first draft, just get the words down on paper, and then after having done that, go back and revise, and that's very successful for some people. That's fine for them. Others, like me, kind of labor over each sentence and make sure it's just so before moving on to the next sentence or the next paragraph. That's most likely a little more time-consuming process. I'm not sure it's a more efficient one, but that's the one I'm comfortable with. But to be a good writer, you need to take time, either up front or after you've written the first draft, going back and reviewing and revising and making sure this manuscript is saying what you want it to say. You most likely can overdo it and nitpick, get to the point where you're nitpicking, and I think I may fall at that end of the continuum. But on the other hand, you don't want to just whip something off and submit it. Usually that's not going to be your best work. Good writing involves rewriting.
The basics of empirical testing of hypotheses and the creation of hypotheses. I don't know what the alternatives are to that. And I think it's a moral, ethical responsibility, if you're going to intervene in people's lives and organizational lives, that it be based upon the best knowledge and the most valid data that you can harvest, understanding that you evaluate, and if it doesn't work, you revise as required. I just don't know what the alternative is to that unless we move out of our area and go into a department of theology.
Dr. Morgan?
Well, no one of the three of us really started out in professional education, psychologists. And I think when we got into education, began to look at the problems of education, particularly the American public educational system, one of the most salient features of that national system was a non-empirical approach, where the evaluation that was made of classrooms and schools and school systems was based on the fidelity with which traditional educational processes were employed. And the total focus was on the elegance of the process, and with almost no attention to the outcomes as a consequence of those processes. And so in the early work in which all three of us were engaged in the 60s on programmed instruction, that was one of its strongest and most fundamental characteristics, is that you decided, or somebody decided what it is a student was to learn, whether it was a student or a faculty member or a school system, and then you introduced instructional interventions, learning processes, and then you measured whether or not what you intended to achieve with respect to learning had in fact been achieved, not pure and simple empiricism. And that has, I think, instructed our work all these years. And I would say it's probably the most fundamental principle of instructional systems today. There are a lot of important and valuable features in instructional systems and technology, but I would say the empirical approach is the most basic one, and without which none of the others could function.
I certainly would agree with the empirical approach. Often, of course, we make more progress when we have good theory that allows us to follow that theory and derive. One of the things that really distinguishes today from a period of 50 years ago is the worldwide quality movement. And one aspect of the quality movement, and you know, that's what enables us to own electronic equipment and all those sorts of things, is this notion of continuous improvement. And so continuous improvement is simply another way of saying empirical testing and revision. But it's a very powerful notion, not only in our business, but in other people's business. And so I guess one of the greatest fears that I have is that within the field of instructional systems, as I read what's available in the journals, I become worried about that, because I do not believe that we're seeing the kind of work that's going to lead the system forward. That the basic psychology and the basic communications technology and so on is just not advancing at any rate that's going to sustain the development. I worry about that.
The biggest obstacle to getting something published was getting it written. And once you got something written, you could almost always find some place to publish it. So there's just an awful lot of stuff being put into the quote literature now, you know, through ERIC, through electronic journals, through you know, primary, secondary, tertiary levels of periodicals. So that I think that if you just look at how much good research is being published, or good theoretical articles relative to the whole, the percentage is a lot less. But on the other hand, I think people are just as smart as they ever were. I think there's just as many rigorous thinkers and researchers out there as there ever were. And so I think there's outstanding, you know, research and thinking that's happening.
This program is the second in a series of 2 tapes discussing writing books and articles and research.